Going Medieval finally reached version 1.0 in March. And look, after 4 years in early access, the game has come out of the oven in a heavy state. The enemy AI was rebuilt from scratch. There is a completely new progression system with grand objectives, new roles for settlers, new buildings. There's a lot happening, especially if you are jumping into the game for the first time. That is why, in this video, I am going to talk about the 10 most important items you need to focus on right at the start of the game. I am Matthew, and the video starts now. Do you know what I used to do in the first few minutes of Going Medieval? I would build some small houses, start planting food, organize the stockpile, and completely ignore the fact that a pack of bloodthirsty raiders was on the way. The first raid arrives faster than you think, and by the time you hear that warning, your wooden walls are still half built and your settlers are carrying carrots. There is no experience more humbling than watching your colony be destroyed before you even finish the first hut properly. The mistake isn't just failing to build a wall, it's not thinking about a choke point from the beginning. Many people surround everything with walls and leave 3 entrances open because it looks more natural, and then the raiders enter through all of them at once while your settlers run in circles. The logic here is simple. A single narrow entrance forces the enemy to go where you want them, while your archers stay in a comfortable position above, destroying everything that enters. A simple wooden door, 2 archers on the upper floor of a small tower, and 1 guy with a sword in front already solved the first raid without drama. What caught me off guard was thinking, I'll do the defense later. Going Medieval does not give you that luxury. The game tests you early on specifically to see if you took the threat seriously. And if you don't have at least a line of wall with a single entry point before day 15, the chances of taking a heavy loss are very high. Traps along the entrance path are a bonus that makes a huge difference because they weaken enemies before they even get close to your settlers. The good news is that this is easy to fix once you understand the concept. What matters is the geometry of your defense. 1 path, a reinforced door, and your best armed settlers waiting on the other side. With that in place, the first raid becomes almost a formality, and you can focus on growing the colony without that sense of panic every time the warning appears on the screen. There is one thing Going Medieval doesn't tell you clearly enough. Food rots. You spend hours hunting, planting, cooking, and building a nice organized stockpile, and when summer arrives, you look at your supplies and half the food has turned to trash. It is one of the most frustrating mistakes in the game because you did everything right, planted at the right time, harvested at the right time, and still lost everything because of the temperature. Nobody talks about this at the start, and you only learn after nearly starving. The cellar is not a luxury, it is a basic necessity to survive the first year. Excavating an underground space and putting your food stockpile inside completely changes the game because the temperature underground is naturally cooler and more stable, which significantly slows down the rotting process. The difference between having and not having cold storage is literally the difference between your colony having a comfortable summer or your settlers cursing each other while starving in the middle of July. What trips people up is the order of priority. Most new players focus first on beds, then food, then defenses, and underground storage is always left for when there's time. The problem is that the first summer arrives before you realize it, and digging a cellar after the food has already started to rot is too late. Ideally, you want to have at least a basic underground space marked as a stockpile in the first few weeks of the game, even before you have enough food to fill it. The good part is that making a basic cellar doesn't require anything special. You just need to pick a corner of the map, dig a few blocks down, cover it with a roof, and designate it as a storage area. It doesn't need to be pretty or large at first. Over time, you can expand it and perhaps add a more advanced refrigerator once you unlock the technology. But in the first months of the game, a simple hole in the ground already solves the issue. This is one of those game secrets that separates those who reach winter well-fed from those who arrive desperate, counting every leftover piece of bread. If there is one thing the game makes a point of teaching you in the most painful way possible, it is that hunting animals is not a long-term strategy. At first, it seems great. You have meat to spare, your settlers are happy, and you think the food will never run out. Then winter arrives, the animals disappear, and suddenly you realize you didn't plant anything because you got too comfortable with that false sense of abundance. Agriculture is not an option in Going Medieval. It is the backbone of your colony. Timing is everything when it comes to planting. Spring is your window of opportunity, and if you let it pass without putting at least one growing zone in the soil, you will feel it directly in your food supply by autumn. Cabbage and carrots are the most recommended to start with because they grow relatively fast and give a decent return, even in average soil. The classic mistake is waiting to unlock more advanced technology before starting to plant, when in reality, you should be placing the first cultivation zone as soon as the option appears, even if it is in a small space. Soil quality matters more than most people realize in the first few hours. You might be planting in the wrong place and having mediocre production without understanding why, while 2 meters to the side, the soil is much more fertile. It is worth taking a second to check the ground quality map before designating your planting area, because a smaller farm in good soil produces more than a huge farm in bad soil. This detail makes a real difference when you're trying to feed a colony that grows with each new season, and do not underestimate the quantity. When you are new to the game, you tend to create a tiny farm thinking it will be enough, and when winter hits, you discover you fed your settlers for 3 weeks and have nothing left. Plant more than you think you need, especially in those first springs, because you can store the surplus in the cellar and use it as a safety margin. Going Medieval is a game that punishes the lack of planning with a cruel slowness, where you don't lose all at once, you lose bit by bit, settler by settler, until you realize you could have avoided it all with a larger farm at the start. Your settlers are wandering around the colony, completely unarmed, while you focus on building walls and planting food. It seems reasonable at first. After all, you have 1,000 things to organize. But when the first raid appears and your settlers run into combat empty-handed, you quickly understand why equipping everyone from the start is not optional. A settler without a weapon in a combat situation is basically an invitation for you to lose someone you spent hours developing. Role division matters a lot here. Your best marksman needs a bow right away, no discussion, because they are the ones who will deal damage from a distance, while the others hold the front. Other settlers with a vocation for combat need at least one melee weapon and, if possible, a shield, because the survival difference between a settler with a shield and one without is brutal in the early raids. The game does not force you to organize this automatically, so if you don't manually equip each one, they will go into the fight as they are, and that usually ends badly. What gets many people is ignoring basic clothes and armor, thinking it doesn't make a difference in the beginning. It does, and a lot. Even simple leather armor reduces enough damage to turn a settler who would have died into someone who comes out wounded but alive. And you can heal a living settler, but you can only mourn a dead one. Crafting basic clothes and armor early on is a cheap investment in time and resources that pays dividends every time a raid happens. The big problem is that the game leaves you distracted with so many other priorities that equipment ends up being postponed indefinitely. You say, I'll equip them after building the barn, after planting, after making the cellar, and before you know it, you are in the first raid with everyone unprotected and desperate. The rule of thumb is simple. Before the end of the first month, every settler with any combat skill needs a weapon in hand and some protection on their body. It doesn't need to be elaborate, it needs to be functional. There is a very specific moment in the game where you look at your settler's mood and see a list of complaints that seems endless. They are tired, stressed, haven't slept well, and in the middle of it all, ate raw food or low-quality food appears as if it were a small detail. It isn't. Eating raw or poorly prepared food in Going Medieval has a direct impact on your settler's mood. And an unhappy settler works slower, produces less, and in extreme cases, starts creating problems within the colony. A simple campfire changes this completely from the first days. The most common mistake is thinking the campfire is a temporary structure that you will replace quickly, and therefore isn't worth positioning correctly. But location matters from the start. Placing the stove or campfire near the food stockpile reduces the time your settlers spend walking back and forth carrying ingredients. And this saved time multiplies over the days in a way that you will feel in the general productivity of the colony. Cooking near where the food is stored seems obvious, but it is surprising how many people build the kitchen on the other side of the map and wonder why everything takes so long. The evolution to the clay oven needs to happen as soon as you are able, not when you remember to do it. The clay oven opens up more elaborate recipes that generate meals with significantly higher nutrition bonuses, which translates into healthier, more resilient settlers with more stable moods. When you are still on the basic campfire while your colony already has 5 or 6 people, you are creating a silent bottleneck in food production that will appear as a problem later, usually at the worst possible moment. The central point of all this is that quality cooked food is not comfort, it is infrastructure. Going Medieval treats nutrition as a real system where what your settlers eat directly affects how much they can work and handle pressure. Campfire on day 1, clay oven as soon as possible, and always near the stock. This simple sequence saves a huge headache later on. Look, if there is one thing that will silently destroy your settlement before you realize what is happening, it is ignoring the research table. I have seen this happen many times. You are busy cutting wood, building walls, storing food, and suddenly everything stalls. Your buildings start to collapse, your crops don't grow right, and you have no idea why. The answer is almost always the same. You never researched anything, or you researched the wrong things too late. The research table needs to be built early. I am talking about one of your first construction priorities. And here is the detail most people ignore. It is not enough to build it and leave it sitting there. You need to put someone with high intellectual skill on it and set that job as that person's #1 priority. Not their second job, not something they do when they feel like it. That person's entire existence in your settlement should be sitting at that table and unlocking knowledge. Think of them as the brain of your village. Everyone else builds and plants. This person ensures the whole operation doesn't go up in flames. So what to research first? Architecture and agriculture in that order. Architecture gives real stability to your structures, meaning your walls and floors stop being a problem and turn into real defense. Agriculture unlocks the farming mechanics that will keep your people fed during the brutal winters. Without these two, you are basically running a settlement on borrowed time. Everything else can wait. Better weapons, more comfortable beds, advanced crafting, none of that matters if your colony starves or if your fort collapses. And one last thing people always ignore: never ever leave the research queue empty. The moment your scholar finishes a project and has nothing in the queue, you are wasting precious time. Progress in Going Medieval is already slow and brutal enough. You cannot afford to have idle hands at the research table. Always leave the next 2 or 3 items queued and ready. Keep the queue full, keep the scholar busy, and your settlement will grow the right way instead of just surviving on luck. Building beds before the first night is not a suggestion. It is the first thing you should do when starting a match. Having your settlers sleep in the open generates mood debuffs that accumulate silently. And in a phase where every point of productivity counts, you cannot afford to have someone underperforming because they spent the night looking at the sky. A small wooden room with basic beds solves this completely, and you can build it in less than 1 game day if you prioritize it from the start. What happens in practice is that the new player sees so much to do that the beds are left for later. You start collecting wood, then remember you need food, then see there is stone nearby and go collect that too, and when night falls, your settlers simply lie on the ground because you didn't stop for a second to build even a basic sleeping spot. The game doesn't stop you from doing this, it just punishes you slowly, almost invisibly, until you realize the whole colony's mood is in the red for no apparent reason. Sleeping outdoors in Going Medieval also increases the risk during night attacks. A settler sleeping in a closed room is protected and has time to wake up and react. A settler sleeping on the open ground is the first to be reached, and you already start the combat in a poor defensive position before even understanding what is happening. This safety detail is often ignored because people think of beds only as comfort, when in fact it is also a tactical decision. The good news is that the room doesn't need to be pretty or large. 4 wooden walls, a roof, a door, and basic beds for each settler already solve the problem completely. Over time, you will improve it, add windows, swap wood for stone, and place furniture that increases the mood. But in the first days, the goal is simple. Everyone sleeps inside a structure before the first night falls. Raw food will kill your settlers faster than any enemy in the game. This is one of the most classic mistakes for those starting and Going Medieval. You take the meat from the first deer you hunted, leave it on the ground or in the stockpile, and your settlers simply eat it raw because they are hungry. Then comes the mood penalty. efficiency drops, and suddenly your entire settlement is running in slow motion while you try to figure out what went wrong. Before anything else, order someone to gather wild berries and mushrooms in the very first minutes. These items do not need cooking, and hold off hunger while you organize the rest. They seem small and insignificant, but they are exactly what ensures your settlers don't panic over food in the first hours. Do not underestimate the power of wild fruit at the start of the game. Hunting comes right after. Rabbits and deer are accessible with the starting bow and provide enough meat for a good reserve. But here is the crucial point. As soon as the first meat enters your stockpile, a basic kitchen needs to be functioning. It doesn't need to be anything elaborate. A simple campfire already works. The act of cooking transforms a risk into a resource, and this difference is huge in the early seasons of the game. Think of food as your control thermometer for the settlement. If the cooking queue is always active and your settlers are eating hot meals, you are on the right track. If someone is eating raw or starving, it is a sign that some other priority stole your attention when it shouldn't have. Going medieval does not forgive carelessness with the basics, and food is the most basic of all. Wood and stone are the two resources that define the pace of everything you do at the beginning of Going Medieval. Without them, you don't build walls, you don't make beds, you don't raise a roof, you don't produce tools. You do absolutely nothing that matters in the first hours of play. It is the kind of resource so fundamental that it seems too obvious to mention, but that is exactly why so many people underestimate the amount they need to collect right away. The mistake isn't forgetting to collect, it's collecting too little. You start the game, send a settler to chop down maybe 3 trees, pick up some loose stones from the ground, and think you have enough material to start construction. Then you decide to make a room, start the walls, and in the middle of building, the material runs out. Your settler stops, goes to get more wood, comes back, continues, and stops again. This broken construction cycle wastes an absurd amount of time and delays everything that should have been ready before the first night or the first raid. The loose stone on the ground is a gift the game gives you at the start that many people ignore. You don't need to mine anything. Just order your settlers to pick up what is already scattered across the map, and that already gives you enough material to start more solid structures much sooner than you would expect. Collecting loose stone before starting any construction is a habit that separates those who have an organized colony by the end of the first month from those who are still correcting the mistakes of the first week. The right mindset here is to treat the initial collection as its own phase of the game, not as something you do in parallel with everything else. In the first days, putting all available settlers to chop trees and collect stone at the same time is the most efficient move there is. You accumulate a generous stock, and from there, construction flows without interruption. You know that feeling of spending hours hunting, collecting wood, and gathering resources, only to look at the ground and see everything rotting where it was dropped. Well, that happens to practically everyone in their first match of Going Medieval, and the fault is almost always the same. Nobody created a proper stockpile at the start. The stockpile is basically the backbone of your entire operation. Without it, your settlers don't know where to store anything, resources stay scattered across the map, and the food you worked so hard to get disappears before reaching anyone's mouth. Creating a storage zone in the first few minutes is not optional. It is the difference between an organized settlement and complete chaos disguised as a village. And here is a technical detail that many people ignore. When you create the stockpile, use the hand tool to mark all items as Allow. By default, some resource categories might be blocked, meaning your settlers simply ignore those items on the ground, even with plenty of space in the stock. It seems like a small detail, but it is exactly the kind of thing that makes your game stall without an apparent reason. Ultimately, the stockpile is one of the first things that separates those who survive the first winter from those who start over from scratch in frustration. Before building elaborate walls or thinking about defenses, ensure your resources have a place to go. Going medieval requires you to think like an administrator before you think like a builder.